It recently occurred to me that I should make a video about the piece values before I move on to the stuff like tactics and basic endgame mates. Okay, I will try to make this video useful for a wide range of levels, like including maybe even advanced players. Um, First of all, everybody probably knows that, okay, a pawn is worth 1 point, a knight is worth 3 points, a bishop's also worth 3 points, a rook is worth 5 points, a queen is worth 9 points, and the king is priceless because if it gets checkmated, then it's the end of the game. Um, so by the points, so the knight being worth 3 points means that it is worth 3 pawns because, okay, it's 3 points versus 1 point. Uh, these pawns are theoretically worth the same value as this one knight, and we also talked about queen being worth 9 points. That means it could be worth something like a rook, a bishop, and a pawn. 5 plus 3 plus 1 equals 9, and that's 9. Okay, uh, there are some interesting manuscripts written in like the early 1800s. There's actually many of them, and some of them have, a lot of them differ in what they believe the value of the pieces to be. There's one manuscript that says that the queen is worth 15 pawns, okay? That means one queen is worth these many pawns. But that's obviously not true. That's completely outdated information. Although I don't even think en passant was an existing rule back then. I could be wrong. Maybe it was about a similar time that en passant became a rule in chess, early 1800s. Yeah, anyway, I will leave a link of the history of piece values in the description if you are interested. Okay, so we did talk about that generic value of the pieces that everybody knows. I just wanted to maybe improve upon it. Uh, I mean, these improvements that I'm about to talk about, they are well known among higher players, higher rated players. It's just that there isn't too much obvious coverage about it, like in front of us, without looking for it. So, pawn, we can agree maybe it's worth 1 point. A knight is, we can agree 3 points. Okay, about the bishop, I wanted to talk about the bishop. The bishop is going to be worth 3.5 points. No, sorry, 3.25 points. 3.25 points. Because when you have a bishop pair, you control a lot of squares. It's almost like having two diagonal rooks. So, well, it's not that strong, okay? Two rooks will be 10 points. It's even stronger than a queen, in theory. Two bishops will just be worth 6.5 points. Uh, when you lose one of these bishops, the piece value can be scored back down to 3. Because when you lose a bishop, okay, you have only one color to control. The dark squares. It can never move into a light square. So that's adjustment number 1. We should say the bishops are actually worth 3.25 points, not 3.5 points. Okay, adjustment number 2. The king is priceless, right? But that's not really meaningful regarding the power of the king. I think it is appropriate to assign a value for the king that uh, communicates to us how useful it is as a piece itself. In the endgame, Yasser01 said it is worth about 3.5 points. Some people consider it to be worth 4 points, okay? In the endgame, you can say a king is like slightly stronger than a knight, it's slightly stronger than a bishop maybe. Okay, it's just slightly weaker than a rook. But basically, this king will be worth like the same amount of material as the pawn and bishop regarding its power level. Speaking of this, about endgames, okay. In the middle game, we can say that the king is worth way less, like maybe worth half a pawn or something like that. It's not very influential. We never put the king in the middle or exposed. King always kind of waits until the endgame to be activated. Well, there's an interesting book called The Secret of Chess by Ludmil Tetsvikov. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. I will also put it in the description. He is a Bulgarian, or is it Bulgarian? He's a Bulgarian computer research scholar. He studied computer chess for over 5 years, maybe. And in the very first chapter of the book, he discusses some stuff about the piece value. He says something like that there is a different piece value in the middle game and in the end game. So like in the middle game, the piece's value will be a different number from the end game. So for example, a knight can be worth maybe 3.5 in the middle game and then like 2.8 or something in the end game. Ultimately speaking, these piece values are kind of like useful guidelines, but they need to be broken sometimes. They're very arbitrary. You should not follow it to heart because even though maybe 99% of the time it's bad to give up a bishop for a pawn, you do have to look out for cases where it works. Another thing I should say is that the piece values that we use do not really share a big relationship with the end games, okay? So for example, the knight is worth 3 points each, and this is going to add up to 6 points, right? Well, the thing is, white cannot force a win. This is theoretically drawn, and like proven to be drawn. It's completely proven. There's no way to force a win. However, king and rook versus king is a very simple win. The rook is only worth 5 points, but this is actually completely winning, and that will be a topic for maybe a few videos after this one. Basic endgame mates. What else? Okay. In many cases, the king and pawn versus king is winning for white here. This can win if it's black's turn to move, and then you do this. This will also be a topic that I will talk about in maybe one of my last videos for beginner course, how to evaluate king and pawn versus king endgames, and the most important things about them, how to win or how to draw. Okay, so in conclusion of this video, I will set the pieces back up. Okay, new and improved list, maybe. Pawn is worth 1, maybe slightly more in the endgame. Knight is worth 3, pretty much always, in my opinion. Bishop is worth 3.25. Rook is worth about 5. Queen is worth 9. And then, in terms of firepower, we can consider the king to be worth 4 or 3.5, somewhere in between that. It doesn't really make a big difference. It's extremely arbitrary and depends on the endgame. But let's just say 3.5 because Yasser Sira 1 also said that. Okay. And then, of course, there's like a difference between the middle game and end game values. So the king will be worth less than like one pawn because we shouldn't even use it in the middle game. Almost never. The queen will stay 9, especially because it's kind of colorblind. Well, the rook is also colorblind, so it can stay as 5. Bishop can depend a lot. It's kind of out of, like, we can talk a lot about the bishop and how there's a lot of color complexes in chess that kind of determine its value, but on average, 3 1/4 is appropriate for all stages. And for knight in the endgame, maybe it will be worth slightly less in the endgame. It depends on the material balance. Like, if you have knight and a pawn on the edge versus a king, then that would always win, pretty much. Whereas a bishop and a corner pawn, or a rook pawn, would draw if the bishop's the wrong colored square. Again, color complexes are something interesting to discuss, but maybe out of scope with this video. And then finally, pawns can be worth maybe, depending on how it's positioned, it can be anywhere between 1 point and even 10 points. People say, like, when a pawn is on the 7th rank, when a pawn is about to promote, this pawn is worth about a rook, worth 5 points. Yeah, these piece values, they are very arbitrary. In fact, there's like maybe some of the strongest computers ever, AlphaZero, Leela Chess Zero. Well, they are artificial intelligence. They don't understand piece values. They are not programmed to have them. So what's the use then, you might think? Well, they are a good guideline, and they will definitely help you better understand certain trades that someone makes, or like why you should retreat if you're getting kicked around by pawns. One last thing to talk about, actually, now that I'm here. Let's set up the board to be a full board. There's a principle that says don't go pawn hunting in the opening because you run out of time. I will show an example from the Sicilian Najdorf. Okay, bishop g5. Yeah, f4, queen b6, and queen d2. Okay, black can actually take this pawn, but it's a very sharp and dangerous line that's been worked out to a draw because it's extremely studied, highly studied, and it's extremely theoretical and complicated. There's like a lot of memory. But in general, it's not good for you to take like these pawns on the edge of the board during the opening because you need to develop. And what I wanted to say is that one pawn is worth about maybe 3 points of development. So like if you have 3 pieces out, then that's just as good as opponent being not developed but having a pawn extra. Let's set up a board here. Okay. So white is down a pawn, but developed by 3 points. So this would be considered like equivalent exchange. Let's check the engine to see evaluation of the position. Okay, yeah, it's like roughly equal. It's saying negative 0. Okay, now it's down to 0. Yeah, so this is actually a pretty accurate comparison. We can say that being 1 pawn down is like worth being 3 points up in development. Yeah, that's probably correct. uh, in principle, it's a good guideline. Okay, I think that sums up everything I need to talk about in this video. I hope this video helps for further chess understanding. It should help for some of the tactical stuff I will talk about maybe, or I guess it will help best for the basic endgame mates. Alright, anyway, take care and I hope this was interesting.